Today, we're going to be talking about the People Promise. We are inclusive and compassionate.
Yes.
So what is this about? So the NHS says of this that we do not tolerate any form of discrimination, bullying or violence. We are open and inclusive. We make the NHS a place where we all feel we belong.
Yes.
So looking into it, it does seem that this is about unfair treatment. Is that how you see it as well?
I think so. I see this to mean trying to make sure that everybody who works in the NHS feels that they have a sense of belonging, feels that they have a sense of support, and that they are accepted for who they truly are. You know, a bit similar to when we spoke about code switching and how that impacts in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think this is quite a similar one when you think about inclusivity.
Yeah.
It's all about being able to be authentically yourself and having that sense of belonging and bigger purpose almost. That's how I see this one.
Is it more than being about unfair treatment and eliminating unfair treatment?
I think a lot of it is, I do actually. I think most of it is probably about eliminating unfair treatment, because I think when you speak of inclusivity, you know, you sort of go to those groups of people who are potentially, you know, marginalized, and ensuring that they feel included and accepted, and that they feel that they have a sense of belonging. So. And unfortunately, when we think about marginalized groups, those are the groups that unfortunately do end up at the end of unfair treatment in some way. So I think that the promise to ensure that its people are, that its people are included, or its promise for inclusivity, shall I say, and compassion, I would say it's definitely about eliminating that unfair treatment, because that's just kind of like the nature of the experience, unfortunately, of people who are marginalized.
Definitely come back later to who it affects, who is impacted by unfair treatment. But I thought I'd make a little list here when I did some research, so we can identify what unfair treatment is. And there's 8 points, it seems to be. So I thought it might be useful if I just list them out, because there might be people that watch this that are victims of unfair treatment themselves, and knowing what unfair treatment is might help them see that they are affected by it, that they are a victim of it. And then and maybe as well in this, we can also discuss about what people can do if they do feel they are a victim of unfair treatment. So 8 points. Asking someone to do something that they might not be comfortable with. Shaming. Undermining someone's work. Creating conflict by pitting personalities against each other. Discrimination. Favoritism. Blocking advancement or growth. And finally, bullying, which I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Have you experienced yourself, would you say, either you personally or being witness of unfair treatment?
You know, I have, and I've spoken publicly about my experiences alongside my career. You know, I've written a few articles for yourself and for Nurses.co.uk, just, you know, kind of reliving my experiences when I have felt like I've been unfairly treated. But, you know, I know that I'm an anomaly in that not many people are able to speak publicly about their experiences when it's not gone favorably. So I definitely agree with this list. I think sometimes it's hard to prove your experience, and sometimes there's validity in everybody's experience. That's what I always say. You know, my experience might not have been your intended outcome of your behavior towards me, but nonetheless, it doesn't undermine what I've taken from that.
Okay, so intent doesn't make any difference.
Yes, I agree with that. I think we have to be mindful that sometimes your intended outcome of your behavior might not be what you intend it to be, but nonetheless, it's still going to influence and impact how it's, that how it's received by that person.
Yeah.
So I think intent and experience don't, are two different things.
Yeah.
And one doesn't determine the other. I don't think, in my experience anyway,
Yeah.
I don't think so. Because some people, you might, most people are not bad people. Most people are not people that go around thinking, actually, I'm going to do this thing to purposely make this person feel this way. But nonetheless, we know that people's actions have sometimes unintended consequences.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. To be worthwhile
Mm.
sharing your
Mm.
story, your experience.
Yeah, I think so. For me, the experience I've had of sort of unfair treatment has been around me feeling like my race has impacted my ability to feel accepted within my sort of working environment. I have felt that the things that make me who I am, so my gender, my race, my age, so those intersectionalities of my being, I felt definitely impacted me in being welcomed, having that sense of belonging within that working environment. And it made me feel almost also that it impacted on my potential for my career development as well. And I think sometimes, I know that's not on the list, but I think one of the other things are those microaggressions that can be really hard to actually describe and to evidence, because a lot of the time it's those underhanded things that sort of, take place. And actually sometimes also it's the things that are not said that are hard to, that are difficult and can be microaggressions. It's not always what is said, but actually sometimes it's what's not said and what's excluded that can make you feel that sense of not belonging. And those nuances make it really hard, really, to actually describe and say what you're feeling and say what's happened to you. And a lot of the time that can make you feel really isolated and really alone in your pain almost. And I always say to people, there's support in sharing what you've been through, and what you continue to go through. It doesn't make it easy, but I think there is there is a sense of relief once you feel like you can tell somebody what's happening and what you're experiencing.
In your experience, using your experience, what's your suggestion for somebody? What's the first step that somebody could take if they feel they've been aggrieved?
I think I think it's important to find someone that you can confide in. I think it's really important to.
Colleague or a manager, or either?
I think either. I think whatever in the first instance feels comfortable for you as the individual. Because like I say, it's really difficult to actually speak out against unfair treatment. It's not an easy thing to speak out about anybody that's treated you unfairly. So I think it's important to find that person that you feel that you can confide in, that you feel comfortable to share what your experience has been, even if it's just to unburden yourself from holding that in, because that also can have negative consequence on your own mental state, on your own well-being, by holding that negativity in.
Mm.
So actually having that person, I mean, we all have that sense of relief when we feel like we can tell somebody how we felt. It can be therapeutic in itself just to unburden yourself from that. So I think just finding someone that you think, actually, this person is going to be my safe space. This person is going to give me the space to share and tell how I feel. And the person is not going to judge me for what I've said. They're going to listen and be empathetic and maybe even advise me as to what I should do next.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's another contributor to the site, Ben Slater, and people can find him on LinkedIn as well. He talks about sharing the burden, and he uses the metaphor in the video he did for us. He's literally holding like a weight, one big weight and one small weight. And when you start sharing it, the burden becomes much, much lighter. And so that has to be the first step, doesn't it? So if somebody is watching this, let's go and talk to somebody about it.
Absolutely. Talk to somebody about it, whether it's your family members, your loved ones, your friends, whether it's a colleague, a peer, someone that you feel is going to give you that safe space to share what you have experienced. But of course, there are also those, more formal routes, if you like. You can take the issue to your manager. And if it's your manager that the issue is with, you can take it to your manager's manager and have that conversation. Within the NHS, we've got freedom to speak up guardians. You can take it to that person if you feel that actually the issue you have, you don't feel like you have any other outlet to discuss these things. So you can take that there also.
Will everybody know who that person is in their trust?
I would hope so. I really would hope so. So freedom to speak up guardians were introduced to provide that safe, sort of safe space, confidential space to discuss any issues pertaining to any concerns or risks that you might be observing within your workplace that you feel, you're not able to take to, your direct line managers or your direct, working peers. So they're supposed to provide that confidential space to kind of, take concerns to. And they can advise, they can sort of direct you in the direction to take next if you've got concerns or issues around any patient issues, any issues pertaining to yourself and others, and that's why they were sort of introduced across the country in many different trusts. So if you don't know who your freedom to speak up guardian is within your trust, I'm hoping that you can search your intranet, search freedom to speak up guardian, and they should be available within most NHS trusts now across the country.
I guess the other challenge, though, so that's the practical side, knowing what to do. The other side is feeling bold enough, feeling brave enough to do it. Because I guess if you are a victim of bullying, you may not even want to admit that to yourself. It may come with a sense of shame. I was reading here about what Ben Slater has said about bullying when he said, "What is bullying?" He said it humiliates, it creates unwanted physical or mental harm. Bullying is hurtful, repeated, involves the imbalance of power, and is intentional. And if you are the victim of that, in yourself, you may feel that you're a confident person, and yet suddenly you find yourself being the victim of bullying. It would knock your confidence, and if your confidence is undermined, you might feel that it's a big step to then have your, speak up about it with somebody because you feel a sense of shame.
Absolutely. And that's really difficult. It's a really hard, and that's why often people sadly don't speak up about their negative experiences whilst they are within the environment.
They might just leave.
Absolutely. Often people just disengage and they withdraw and they leave from that. From that space.
We've run another survey just recently, but whenever we run surveys asking nurses why they might leave, giving us the reasons, and it's the same. You look at we've got some information somewhere in these notes, RCN surveys, NMC surveys. Bullying and unfair treatment always figures within the top 10, usually higher. People will just leave. So it's really important that we address this, that the NHS addresses. It's great that they are addressing it.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's really important that we continue to do what we can to support people to sort of share their experiences of why they're leaving. So that's why exit questionnaires and exit interviews are so important, because we need to understand, why that person has left and why they've made a decision to leave. And continue probing people to really get to the bottom of that. But because it's easier to just, we're all human, aren't we? It's easier for us to remove ourselves from conflicts than it is to go towards it and, you know, and kind of challenge it head on. But I think as organizations, we have to do what we can to really allow people that space to open up and tell us the reasons and their experiences whilst they are within our trust.
Yeah. So, you know, when I think about bullying, I suppose when I first started thinking about it, I just imagined it would be from manager to staff member. And that does happen. But it's also peer to peer, so staff to other staff. And then when we chatted about this before, I can't remember if it was in another video or it's just us chatting.
Yeah.
It's patient to staff as well, isn't it? Which I'd never thought of, but I guess, you know, it's obvious once you said that.
Yeah.
Is that, have you experienced that again? Have you witnessed that?
So I haven't experienced that personally, but I've certainly had stories of instances where, and again, it goes back to this people promise about people feeling about that inclusivity and compassion, because it's not only just a matter of, as you say, you know, peer-to-peer bullying or manager to staff bullying, but also the impact of working within a team whereby you may experience some harassment or some racism, for example, from, you know, service users, and not having the support of your colleagues or the support of the organization against that harassment or against that, you know, discrimination or racism or, you know, verbal abuse essentially. And actually that can be equally detrimental as it, you know, as it is when it's peer to peer and, you know, within teams, because I think that sense of, well, actually no one is standing up for me against this, nobody is advocating on my behalf, but instead it's almost, the behavior is almost being allowed to be perpetuated and be continued. That can be very distressing for the individual.
Yeah. Are you given, is there training on how to deal with harassment from patients?
Do you know what? That's a really good question, Matt. And I don't think I've ever been made privy to training of how to manage this. No. But again, it's something that I think you're absolutely right. I think organizations should be supporting their employees with the language to use to combat these things in their local areas.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, level of detail, things like that. I can imagine somebody would watch this discussion and say, you know, lovely idea, but the stress that the NHS and other healthcare organisations are under, there's just no time to do that.
Yeah.
But unless we do start solving some of these problems bit by bit and chipping away, we're not gonna solve the staffing crisis.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be solved with one magic bullet. It's going to be solved with dealing with the detail like this, pulling it apart and trying to rebuild it by implementing training for this, and there'll be many other things that we could go along. I don't know, I'm just waffling on here, but I'm probably have to cut this bit out. But
no, I agree. I think we have to start looking at the workforce as a whole, and I think that's why this promise is so important, because it's given that recognition of differences, and when we talk about inclusion and compassion, you know, race is just one element of it, but actually there's a whole range of other things. You know, there's a whole range of other differences that make individuals who they are. And I think that's the whole point of it, from what I understand of it, is recognizing people as individuals, as different, and still treating everybody with that compassion, and with that care and that respect, and ensuring that everybody feels that sense of belonging to something greater. So actually that sense of being part of an NHS that represents its people and supports its people and cares for its people, no matter of their differences, whilst embracing their differences, you know? And so I think you're right. I think we have to get to that place where we do see people as that, because without that sense of belonging and that sense of inclusion, we're not going to have any, we're not going to, you know, our retention issue, our retention crisis is going to continue. And people are not going to want to join this, you know, one of the world's biggest employers, which is the NHS. People are not going to want to join it if they know that if they don't get that sense of promise to protect its people and stand by its people.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to say a minute ago is it will feed into every single area, you know, recruiting. So you're trying to avoid bias during the hiring process. You're promoting people with who share the correct values. But there was a really interesting piece about this in an RCN article, and I'll share the link when we publish this. And it was especially Maggie Heaton is the woman. So if you get to the article and scroll through it, look at this passage around what Maggie Heaton is suggesting that so she's saying evidence suggests, or the article is saying evidence suggests it's more common at times of change. This is unfair treatment, where there are rigid hierarchies, which is definitely the NHS, where leadership is poor and where bullying is unchecked by disciplinary action. So Maggie Heaton suggests that the pressure is coming from the government to the chief executive. So from the very top to the chief executive, who's putting pressure on the ones below, who puts pressure on the ones below them. And so it cascades down. Eventually that pressure gets to the very lowest level of the trust. Sometimes people are getting so stressed out, they don't even realize they're bullying somebody else. And when bullying becomes embedded in an organization, it can be difficult to shift. She goes on, really, it's about tackling the culture. If we can get to that culture and make someone, the chief executive, responsible for tackling bullying in their organization, that would be a start. No, she's suggesting it's, I guess, systemic.
Yeah.
Change has to come from the top.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that's achieved, then I suppose what I was saying a minute ago is that it will then filter down and through to every activity in the NHS, promotion, hiring, training,
care, how we deliver care.
Yeah. So I mean the costs of it, I made a note here as well. The costs
I think you've got in here that the cost of bullying is estimated to cost the taxpayer 2.281 billion per year.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And it just, you know, I mean, that's the financial cost, isn't it? But what's the cost on the individuals, the cost on the care that we provide, the cost on the culture of the organization, and the the ability for the organization to actually continue to thrive and grow. I mean, there's other unintended costs, aren't there? And it's a costly thing that's affecting and impacting.
And not just the individual, right? You know, they're taking that home to their families, maybe their friends.
Yeah.
And carrying that stress around with them, and that family then picks up that stress as well. So no, you're right. It's not just obviously the financial cost is huge, but the emotional cost is big as well. I mean, I suppose I just didn't realize how large a problem it is. I
mean, I actually really like what Maggie Heaton is stating here, that actually some of this is the unintended consequence of the pressure on clinicians and teams. And actually due to the pressure and the sort of the burden of this, it then becomes almost embedded in the organization. I think what she's saying is, you know, from what I understand of it, is that, again, like I said, it's not, you know, individuals aren't necessarily bad people. Sometimes it's the environment that becomes that place that sort of becomes the catalyst for this.
It's a really important point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't just go around finger pointing and saying to certain people, you're the one to blame here.
So we do have to think about, actually, you know, when we have got these instances and these incidents and you know, these cases of bullying and harassment, you know, we have to ask ourselves, what's the environment that's allowed this to happen?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, how has the environment shaped this and perpetuated this incident, as well as looking at the individual, but actually looking at the environment that's allowed this to take place.
Yeah.
And I think that's Maggie's point. Understood.
So I guess you're being kind of a bit more considerate about the bullier and understanding the context of the bullying, and why they became somebody that bullies somebody else. Like you say, it's not that they woke up that morning and decided they want to turn somebody into a victim. They are themselves victims of the system that's overstressed and overworked.
So then it goes back to then how are we going to ensure that our organizations are inclusive and compassionate, even, apologies. And I think that's a question that, you know, we should continue to ask ourselves. You know, how do we ensure that, you know, we treat each other with kindness, with fairness, with transparency, and that we bring people along with us, rather than, you know, that authoritative way of, you know, do as I say and not as I do, and that type of, you know, regime of treating and managing and supporting people.
Yeah. When I have, well, most of the conversations I have, and where I'm talking with people about problems, not just in the NHS, but in private healthcare as well, it simply boils down to the staff shortage.
Yeah.
All of the problems ripple out from that. Obviously, it's a chicken and egg, because you can't solve the staffing crisis without solving these other problems, but these other problems won't get solved until you've got, day after day, a fully staffed ward or community team.
Yeah.
Every day that a nurse has to come in, and they're faced with more work than they are able to do, because it isn't staffed properly.
Yeah.
There is no time to sort out many of these other problems, and they will be stressed. And you know, we all know the reasons behind the staff shortage. I think it's lack of proper investment. It's the you know, taking away the bursary in 2015. Brexit has had a massive impact. You know, we need to stand up and just call it for what it is. Why are we here, and how do we start fixing these problems?
Yeah.
I've been also quite outspoken on, you know, the increase in temping and locum nurses. It's necessary, and I understand why many nurses choose to go down that route as well. But it's not a long-term solution.
No.
It won't help solve some of the problems that, you know, we talk about in these conversations. A continuing long-term reliance on a lot of temps. I don't know. I mean, that's how I see it as an outsider. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think that in some areas there is some of the practices are absolutely unreal in terms of the management of the usage of locums and agencies. So I agree completely that we're in a position now where, you know, in order for us to deliver safe staffing levels, we have to rely on the use of locum and agencies within most clinical areas now. But I think in terms of there is something happening with the cost of having locums and agencies on the teams, and the rates at which they're charged, and how that then plays out in terms of the feeling of the substantive members of staff who working alongside locums and agencies. It's becoming demoralizing.
Of course. I mean, we hear it.
Yeah.
We hear the frustration of permanent staff members having to work alongside people that are on multiple times more than they are earning.
Yeah.
It's only ever going to cause a conflict.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I understand there will always be a need for temp. Of course there will be. But there seems to be, there is just it's out of balance. It's out of sync. And that's because there are just not enough nurses. And the government just has to get a grip, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something needs to be done to support that, because it's becoming, it's becoming very difficult for clinicians and other teams to continue with how this is going. Because then what's the thing that makes your staff members want to retain their substantive status? You know, that's for me, I think this is a massive part of our retention issue. It's and like you said, which one comes first, chicken or egg? But something has to be done to put a stop to this, or to at least regain that equilibrium, to regain that balance.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
not, there isn't a magic wand you can wave to suddenly increase the number of registered nurses. But something needs to be, you need to start somewhere. And, you know, they reintroduced a bursary, but it's not the full bursary. You know, and we've got to start training more nurses. That's there's no other solution. You've got to welcome more people in the sector. You know, many young people are still hugely inspired by the prospect of becoming a nurse. That's fantastic. You know, we see it all the time. Loads of articles, videos on our site about it. There's not a problem there. It's not that it's not an attractive sector. You know, it's seen as a vocation. Some people see it as a calling, you know. So that's not an issue. We've actually put hurdles in the way to to allow them to realizing their ambition. Take the hurdles away, make it easier. Don't burden them with a big debt as soon as they start working.
Exactly that. Don't burden them with the big debt, but also value their contribution as a profession. Value our contribution as professionals, and actually, you know, give us the monetary increments that we deserve based on the value that we bring to healthcare overall. And I think at the moment, you know, I know that we are, as a profession, we are sort of having conversations about or preparing, or sort of calling out to other nurses around about, you know, taking a decision to strike, you know, for fairer pay for nurses. And I think probably for the first time in a long time, most people who may have been quite modest or on the fence, or, you know, probably quite laissez-faire about things and just kind of go along with things, are probably really considering actually taking a stand and you know, and vote and strike. Because I think most people, nurses now, just feel really undervalued.
Huge subject in itself. For me, when I look at the way that the pay scales are structured across the bands, is I'd like to see more fairness for those nurses that don't necessarily want to go on to become band 7, A, B, C. You know, they want to stay where they are, so they invest all of their years in the same band, maybe band 6. I think maybe it should be structured so that they get rewarded better for the amount of years that they are in that band. I know that happens to a point,
Yeah.
but it's because on our pay calculator on our site you can see it, but it does tail off, and I think more focus needs to be given on rewarding those that what is it called, lattice growth or lattice career progression, where you're not always striving to go upwards. You want to take your skills and experience, but horizontally, sideways, so you stay at band 6 for many years. And awards will obviously benefit massively from those years of experience, and I think you should be compensated for staying there and applying your years of experience and knowledge, rather than moving into an office-based situation. I don't know. That's maybe that's an area that should be looked at. In your view, do you think graduate, newly registered nurses should be paid more, or would you prefer to see more pay or a pay review given to those that have been in the NHS for a longer period of time?
You know, it's a really tricky question, actually, and I think as you were speaking, I was thinking, what do I think about this? Because I do think that there is, it can go one of two ways. There is definitely merit in financially rewarding those who stay within the profession for a long period of time. Whether or not there should be a reward for staying in your band for a long period of time, I'm not sure. I know that at the moment there is, to an extent.
Yeah, there is.
But I'm just thinking about.
I'm just going to have a look while we're talking about on our pay calculator. But yeah, go on. I'm
just thinking about whether or not one should be more advantaged than the other. I think as long as there is just fairness across the board.
Yeah,
so, you know, if an individual wants to remain as a band 5 for 10 years, I feel like they shouldn't be necessarily be at a disadvantage to an individual who wants to be a band 5 for 5 years and then after the 5th year get a band 6 position. I think as long as there is just proportionate fairness for the amount of responsibility that individuals carry at their bands that they're at, I think that's what people want to know, that they actually, if I'm taking more responsibility, I should be, my pay should reflect that. And at the same token, if I've been in this post for 6-10 years and I am clinically an expert in my field and I do a damn good job, I should also feel like my pay reflects that. So I think as long as people feel that proportionate to their roles, their pay reflects their contribution. I think it's the fairness again, isn't that people want to feel like actually that they're valued, you know?
I'm just looking at it. So band 6, once you have more than 5 years experience, 5-6 years experience or more, currently the earning is 40,588. Whereas if you move up to band 7, so imagine in order to keep going on your 5th year, you'd need to move up to band 7. You start earning 41,659. So it is the case that, if you do want to keep earning more, you will have to move up the bands. And I suppose what I was wondering is is there a benefit in in somebody keeping their experience at band 6 for for 15 years, and should they be rewarded for that? Because I don't know, but could there be value in that, in having that experience? So I'm guessing band 6, they're patient facing most of the time. And band 7 is when you begin to move more into a management position. Is that fair to say?
Traditionally, yes, but I think there are other clinical band 7 roles as well, the clinical lead, the clinical team lead positions that give you the mixture of actually providing your clinical expertise and supporting band 6 and band 5s in their roles, but also having that more supervisory role as well. where you might be starting your line management type journey, you know, providing that direct line management responsibility to junior members of staff. So I think there's always a combination, but I think for the most part, band sixes tend to be that purely clinical senior roles. Yeah,
it's probably could have a session just talking about pay. It's fascinating. But you see my point? I just wonder if, because not everybody is cut out to be a manager. You know, is there value in terms of patient care and the patient experience? Having somebody that's just very good at delivering patient care, could they stay in that role for their whole career? Band 6, but somehow it's structured a little bit better so that beyond 5 years, currently their pay won't go up.
Yeah.
You see where I'm coming from? Does that make sense?
It does, and it does make sense. And I think, and again, I think this is that thing about, it almost goes back to this people promise about in you know, inclusion and compassion. I think it's hard to individualize everything. I mean, that's what we strive for, but that's very difficult. You're talking about one of the world's largest employers.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's not going to be everything for everybody.
Yeah.
I think what we're really saying is, to an extent, we think that there needs to be some individualized, you know, outlook to this.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. Some people's preference are going to be staying in positions for longer periods. And so whether or not organizations need to take a stand on ensuring that pay reviews are done based on perhaps the appraisal process, or whether organizations need to take a stand on actually ensuring that there are career pathways that support individual strengths. So for example, if you've got someone that's clinically strong and clinically that's where their focus wants to be, and they don't have any interest in becoming a manager, there should be clear pathways that supports those individuals based on those strengths.
Yeah.
And I think that really should be where, you know, where trusts are heading towards. Because, you know, I think even if thinking about, you know, my experience of supporting and managing people, I think, you know, if I have a band 6 working and they've been there for 10 plus years, I would be thinking, actually, you know, what more can we support you with? How do we get you to a place where, you know, you're having a meaningful experience at work and it's making an impact still?
Yeah.
Because, you know, even if we think about ourselves, if you're in a position for 10, 15 plus years, you are going to feel a bit mundane. It's going to become a bit more, you know, your responses might become more automatic and not as individual as it could be. So, you know, whether that's the right place for that person, that's also questionable for me, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So it's about ensuring that we've got those really good pathways that support individuals based on where their strengths are, whether it's operations or whether it's clinical, but there has to be those pathways there, I think.
Yeah. Let's change subject. And maybe let's end on who is impacted by unfair treatment. And you know, are there particular groups of people who are affected? I had this. It's actually a comment on one of our articles, I think, or did he send it in to me? I think it might be a contributor, actually. And he said, after 14 years working as a secondary school science teacher, I decided I was going to do something completely different during the pandemic. So I enrolled in a child nursing program at master's level at a university. This was an accelerated 2-year course to become qualified nurse at level 7. It's been an interesting journey. You wouldn't believe the amount of friction I experienced from qualified nurses because I was studying a master's program, let alone the sexism that most men training to become nurses experience at some point. I thought that was interesting because it's not, you know, when we imagine which groups were affected, it's important to remember that if you're part of any group that might be in the minority, you can be affected. And you don't have to be in a minority group to be a victim of bullying either. But you know, I'm imagining that if you are in a minority, there may be a greater likelihood
Mm-hmm.
of unfair treatment. You know, if you're from a diverse background.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's what I was saying about the marginalized groups. You know, unfortunately, you will be more likely to be impacted or affected by some kind of unfair treatment. But what an interesting experience that he's had. Do we know how that? I would like to know how that concluded. How he.
I think he's written or writing an article for the site. So
Okay.
I'll remind myself afterwards. I'll
Mm.
put a little link to it in the notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was illuminating because we just need to remember that anyone can be a victim of
Mm-hmm.
unfair treatment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the biggest impact is the impact of the individual, of course, going through that, but actually that also ripples into the care that patients receive. So if you have an organization or an environment that is riddled in bullying or microaggressions or unfair treatment, you're going to have groups of staff where that culture that negative culture becomes the everyday within the team. And those things trickle down into how we treat patients and the compassion that we show patients.
What do you mean the behaviour becomes normalised and then accepted?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it does become normalized and accepted. And it comes out in the language that we use when we speak about patients and the language we use when we speak to patients. And the treatment that the patients receive then becomes, lesser than and becomes negative. I think, as well as the financial burden, as you stated, I think again for me, this has ripples in the care that we offer. It completely rips through that. So it's really important that we find ways to create organizations and create cultures within our teams that are inclusive, that are compassionate, and that are open. And for me, again, the question it still remains. We have to keep asking ourselves, are our teams inclusive? Are our teams compassionate? And keeping in mind that it's not just about the staff on patient, but actually the staff on staff themselves. Because all of those things are interlinked and they all impact each other.
I think it's important to end also, I think, by saying that you don't have to be the victim of bullying or unfair treatment in order to call it out if you're witnessing it. Especially if it's racism,
absolutely, yeah,
sexism, misogyny.
Yeah.
The witnesses, you almost have an obligation, don't you, to stand up and say this is not on and call it out.
And you know what's really interesting about that? I think sometimes it's often the witness account that can be the thing that makes you, as the person that's been affected, probably realize that you've become desensitized to this.
Right.
And you've actually realized you've come to take this as normal.
Okay.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's so vital that if you see that something is not right, and if by your account you felt uncomfortable for that person going through that, you should say something in support of that individual, because sometimes people that are living this every day can no longer see what they're actually experiencing.
Yeah, and maybe the bullier may not know or see that they're what they're doing. They not be aware of their own behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to that intention thing at the beginning, that it's not always intended.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's the impact it has on that individual or others around them.
Yeah.
And it's what message it sends to the rest of the team about what's accepted and what's tolerated as well.
Yeah. Good. I think we covered everything. I feel we've covered. As much
I think another element is that compassion piece as well. I think compassion is a different thing in its own, in its own right as well. And it's linking inclusivity and inclusion and compassion together. I think it's intended to allow people to see inclusion And the act of being inclusive, it's the act of compassion.
Okay.
That's how I see it, you know. It's compassion that allows us to be an inclusive people.
Mm.
It's that, that curiosity, that respect, that kindness, that fairness,
Yeah.
that openness and transparency. For me, those are the things that allow us to be.
Okay. So not just reacting to the negativity of
Yes.
unfair treatment, but
Mhm.
proactively being compassionate, always being aware of how you can treat people better.
Absolutely. And I think that's why
Acting on that.
yes, that's why I really like that they've put those two things
Okay.
together, that
I get it.
inclusion and compassion. I think they
Yeah.
go hand in
Hand
hand.
in hand. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So we haven't really talked about that, and so we
Mhm.
can have a nice positive
Yeah.
podcast next time about compassion and love.
Exactly that. Oh, well, it's been brilliant chatting again, as always.
Yeah. Thank you.